This week on What to Watch, Pose is back and bringing the ballroom scene to your TV screen.
Who's with me?
Plus, Netflix is keeping America's gray wig industry afloat with Jupiter's Legacy.
We've made a difference, show.
And the women of Girls5eva are reclaiming their cultural dominance on stage and IRL.
Let's go, ladies.
Take a break from staring at the giant Bidens because it's time for What to Watch. At last, M&M's Mix, all together in one bag. Hi everyone, and welcome to Entertainment Weekly's What to Watch, the show where EW staff help you solve your viewing dilemmas. I'm your host, Gerrad Hall, and joining me are three people who'd somehow make a less puzzling pick as SNL host than Elon Musk. Please welcome senior writer Samantha Highfill, digital news writer Nick Romano, and critic Darren Franich. Hey everyone, how are you?
I would watch Darren host SNL, just for the record.
Gladly, any day, any day.
That makes one person who's probably joking about that. But Sam, in fairness, you would be a very controversial pick.
I self-identify as like a hot button topic. Like, I recognize it.
I'm going to get those hashtags started for all of you. All right, guys, let's get the ball rolling. The category is bittersweet ending because the final season of Pose is here. The first two episodes of the third season aired this past week, and we are just not ready to say goodbye to the House of Evangelista. The series was groundbreaking on so many fronts, showcasing ball culture, HIV and AIDS activism, representation for African Americans, Latinos, trans, and gender nonconforming folks. But ultimately, the show is about love, family, and acceptance. Nick, it's kind of crazy to think that all of this took place in the 80s and early 90s, and that culture is still neglected by so many people today. So let me pose a question to you. What do you make of the show's legacy in 2021 and the decision to end after 3 seasons?
I mean, I think the legacy can be defined by the number of reads that Elektra gives people to fill. And I'm going to miss that
Yes.
more than anything. But you're absolutely right. You said bittersweet, and it is such a bittersweet moment. I mean, for most of the cast members, like, this show was their first major roles in the industry. Yeah. I mean, and it was created by a largely LGBTQ group of creatives, which alone just kind of created a unique environment for these performers to really thrive and flourish as performers. So it is really sad, to see that this is ending. But at the same time, Stephen Canals, who is the co-creator of Pose, he was very adamant that, this was the show he set out to make. He looked back on, when he was first pitching the concept of Pose to Ryan Murphy and FX, he had a specific ending in mind, which was to go back to the beginning, examine what all the characters' hopes and dreams were, and then really explore what it means for them to finally get that. And as the writer's room assembled, he found himself getting closer and closer to that ending. And so it just made sense for them to end with season 3 as opposed to kind of stretching it out any further.
Yeah. Well, for season 3, catch everyone up on where this season puts us in terms of timeline.
Yeah, so in season 2, we were in the 80s. Now we're in the 90s, 1994 specifically. Mm-hmm. And, it's really at the height of the AIDS, HIV epidemic in New York City, which really affects all of the characters. I mean, it's also groundbreaking to think that, 3 of the characters are portraying individuals who have HIV, which is kind of insane. And, no other show right now is sort of trying to match that, or even the number of trans series regular roles that we have here. But it affects all of them in different ways. Blanca, who's played by EW's Pride issue cover star, MJ Rodriguez. She is now becoming more of an activist. She's going to rallies. And I think, there's definitely, a level of response and severity that all of these characters sort of feel as they're crying out for this government to help them. And, as history tells us, the government doesn't. So they kind of have to take it into their own hands.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned all of these stars, the folks on the show who, they weren't getting these kinds of opportunities prior to this show. So how do you think Pose has or potentially will continue to change the TV landscape for these stars to continue to have big success in their careers?
It's really difficult to think if it has made, like, culturally for sure, Pose had sort of an immediate impact. But in terms of systemic change within the industry, it's really difficult to kind of pinpoint that. Usually when a show is as successful as Pose is, there are about a million different knockoffs, spin-offs, and everything. And that hasn't really happened in this case. So I still feel like progress is sort of, 2 steps forward, 5 steps back kind of situation.
All right, we need to take a quick break. I am not one to keep you 3 waiting, so forgive me, but we'll be back to discuss Girls5eva. Hopefully it'll be a success. Stick around.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcus Jones from Entertainment Weekly, and I'm going to show you guys my watch zone. We got the hoodie, the blanket, my 3 remotes over here, snacks, TV, and I even got the apps for screeners that I can't show you guys. Thanks for checking out how I watch. Show's starting. Gotta go.
Welcome back to What to Watch. All right, before we move on to Sam, really quickly, Nick, there's a new superhero show on Netflix out this week, Jupiter's Legacy. Do you think this comic book adapted series will satisfy fans of the genre?
I mean, when I watch the show, the effects definitely remind me of Legends of Tomorrow, but it's not as fun as Legends of Tomorrow. Like, it's like one of the superheroes, like, doesn't want to be a superhero. Instead, she does drugs and, like, there's all these, like, serious, like, discussions about legacy and, like, living up to the idea of a superhero, and dynamics between parents and kids. And then at the same time, I look at it and I'm like, this is Legends of Tomorrow, but it's so I think it's sort of trying to be this dark, kind of serious, gritty superhero show while kind of having, like, just the visual flourishes of something much more lighter.
When you say Legends of Tomorrow, like, there the special effects are supposed to look bad. So, like, that's kind of part of the fun of it. that doesn't sound like that's what they're going for here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Mark Miller in an interview, like, described Josh Duhamel's role as sort of like King Lear. And I'm like, I don't think this is the King Lear of superhero shows.
Well, I'm curious to hear what their comparison will be to this next show that we're about to talk about. It's one of my favorites that I've seen so far in 2021. You guys start practicing your girl group choreo because it's time for Girls5eva. The new Tina Fey produced Peacock series follows a Y2K era girl group who get a second chance at fame 20 years later. The group's made up of some pretty talented performers, IRL, Sarah Bareilles, Renee Elise Goldsberry, Paula Pell, and Busy Phillips. So, Sam, I come to you. Is Girls5eva, the series, a one-hit wonder, or does this show have some staying power?
I think it definitely has some staying power. I think it gets more interesting as it goes on. But, it's one of those shows where, it's very, like, classic, I feel like, Tina Fey jokes. Meredith Scardino created it. She was on Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. Very along that vibe. And it has funny things throughout. But it takes a few episodes to really find its groove. So I actually think kind of the longer life of the show, it's only gonna get better and a little bit richer.
Just the talent on display here between Renee Elise Goldsberry, who's amazing. I feel like this is really kind of the showcase that I've certainly been waiting for her since she won the Tony for Hamilton. And even really Sarah Bareilles, who, is kind of playing the character who's sort of the, by default, sane person amidst a lot of people who are seeking fame and glory. I feel like that's all kind of working. And as Sam said, the staying power kind of comes almost from reaching the end of this season and feeling like, okay, there's a lot here to kind of build and grow off of. And the theme song is amazing.
I can't stop singing it. I'm like, right? It kind of is driving me insane now, but in a great way. It's
definitely kind of evoking that early 2000s pop music mentality in a way that I think is really difficult to do. So if you already have a really quotable theme song, I think a show is doing something right.
Do you think the show's targeted at a very specific age group? Because there are references to TRL and Cribs, or do you think it can reach a wide audience in spite of that?
I think both, but I do think if you were alive or were fascinated by the TRL era, it definitely helps. But it's also ultimately just a show about like women like just like trying really hard at something that maybe they're great at, but also they were only a one-hit wonder. Maybe they were never that great. And so that's, I think, where a lot of the humor comes from.
There's these jokes that I think really do speak to, like, certainly someone in my demographic. There's an amazing Derek Jeter and Jordana Brewster joke where I'm like,
yes.
This is way over the heads of anyone born after the year 2002, but too bad for them. But yeah, I feel like there is a certain fascination with that kind of Y2K era now from people who are like half my age. At least I kind of get that sense. And I think that in a weird way, as goofy as the show is, and as Sam was saying, as hilarious and maybe wrong direction-y as these women's kind of hopes and dreams are, it is kind of tapping into something interesting about, how different now is versus 1999, 2000. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like it's all kind of there in season 1, and I'm really hopeful that they get to keep exploring that in further seasons.
All right, you guys. Well, that's it. That's it for our show this week. Thanks to my guests, Darren Franich, Nick Romano, and Samantha Highfill. We will see you next week on What to Watch.